Hello, all. Welcome to the show. I'm Gus Gagliardi, and this is Fire Code Tech. On Fire Code Tech, we interview fire protection professionals from all different careers and backgrounds in order to provide insight and a resource for those in the field. My goal is to help you become a more informed fire protection professional. Fire Code Tech has interviews with engineers and researchers, fire marshals, and insurance professionals, and highlights topics like codes and standards, engineering systems, professional development, and trending topics in the industry. So if you're someone who wants to know more about fire protection or the fascinating stories of those who are in the field, you're in the right place. Welcome to episode 27 of Fire Code Tech. On this episode, we have Joe Meyer. You'll have to excuse my excitement a little bit. I've been wanting to have Joe on the podcast since before I even started the podcast. Been a huge fan of him. Oh, and by the way, for those of you who don't know who he is, I would say he's the largest independent blogger in the fire protection engineering space and really in the fire and life safety space that I'm aware of. Joe is a fire protection engineer with his PE and his master's in fire protection engineering from the University of Maryland. In this episode, we get into his origins in his career, and also we talk about some really fascinating topics like Joe breaks down his tips and tricks and advice for you to pass the engineering exam. We talk about some of Joe's favorite tools and cut sheets that he's broken down for the fire protection engineering designing process and how to streamline your design through his informative data sheets. Anyways, I hope you enjoy the show. It's one of my favorite that I've ever recorded. And also, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode and follow us on social media so you won't miss out when we have great guests like Joe and the solo cast that also release twice a month. Well, Joe, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Just want to say welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here. I'm a big fan.
Awesome. Well, I just wanted to get started off with a little bit about your background, and I kind of start all these podcasts the same way. But yeah, would you tell me a little bit about your background and how you got into fire and life safety?
Yeah, my undergraduate was at the University of Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas. And I had a fire protection engineer speaker come in, talk about what fire dynamics is, what smoke control systems are, a little more about sprinkler and alarm than I had thought at the time. And it sounded interesting. And so the more I explored it, the more I saw the opportunity there. And that was, I guess, my sophomore year in college. And since then, I've been kind of all in on fire protection. I studied master's with the University of Maryland in their fire protection engineering program. And yeah, early on, got started at a large MEP firm out in Kansas City, and then worked for a small MEP firm over across the state line in St. Louis, Missouri. And now I run my own consulting practice.
Awesome. So, yeah, that's great. I always love starting there to, these first couple questions are kind of me getting a sense of your specialty and your background and, kind of your footprint in fire protection and life safety so that I can, kind of instruct the conversation to a little bit as it goes on. But yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your first couple roles in fire and life safety and just kind of, yeah, I mean, broadly what those looked like, what kind of, different projects were you involved in and, your role as a designer and an engineer.
Yeah, early on, I did a lot of commercial work. So it was mainly on the consulting side, putting together bid documents with fire alarm sprinkler systems primarily. And occasionally would venture into a little bit of smoke control work. But it was a lot of commercial, so I did a lot of retail, office, and got into some sports arenas, stadium work, which was really exciting. That was a lot of fun to do early on. And as I as I grew and switched roles, I did more on contracting side. So shop drawing design for sprinkler, got into some military work, and kind of seen a variety of, especially fire alarm and sprinkler, and here recently done more on the passive fire protection and code consulting type of work. But I'd say, I'm kind of deep into the suppression side and a little bit lighter on other things.
Interesting. Yeah, I was really interested in asking you about this because I see, you post a lot about suppression on your, website and blog, and I have a big passion in that area too. But it's kind of interesting. I just thought it was interesting that you were getting into more of the like suppression contracting design. Um, and so I just wanted to suss out, where that background came from. But I find that interesting.
Yeah, the suppression side. I've gotten asked before, like, hey, you run a fire protection website. We've got forums on everything fire protection, but there's a real strong bias towards suppression. I say, yeah, that's my bias. It's not that I don't like fire alarm. I'm not interested in smoke control. I absolutely am. I just I tend to write, based on my day to day and what I'm the challenges that I'm seeing, kind of in the weeds on projects. And for me, it tends to be suppression heavy. So that's there's absolutely a bias there, and it's not because I don't like the other disciplines. Just it's just what comes across the desk, and where I feel I can contribute.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, it's interesting. There's so many different nooks and crannies you can get into with fire protection, and you know, uh, I feel like in school we covered a like a broad base, but yeah, I have a huge interest in the system side of it. Specifically, I worked as for a contractor, fire suppression contractor out of college.
Mhm.
And so I have a little bit more heavy of a background with constructability in regard to sprinkler systems than I do with fire alarms. So
That's
yeah,
right.
I have that similar sort of um, leaning towards the suppression system side of things.
That's right. That's right. And the contracting side, is night and day different than what we see on the bid set, if you will, performance spec style work. It's a whole different level of detail, and at the end of the day, you have to make a decision. You can't defer anymore. There's no, at some point there's nobody else to defer to. You are the guy, and you got to make the decision and make the call. And when there's gray areas or when there's difficult installations, you got to figure out ways to make it work and stay within the bounds of code. So it's I think it's exciting. I find the work challenging, but rewarding too. Being able to get all the way into the weeds and make those determinations.
Man, yeah, I was gonna say if there's one big difference, it's the detail level. It's incredible. There's no delegated design when you're trying to tell somebody who's a foreman, how to make it work.
That's
Uh,
right.
but
That's right.
yeah, I definitely know what you're talking about. So I wanted to get into, Meyer Fire and just about how you started with it all. I'm a huge fan, if you can't tell, and I have been for probably I don't know at least 2018. I was looking back through my emails yesterday and looking for the first signs of Meyer Fire. And I was, bringing up. I think that's as far as the servers went back. It's like January 2018. But yeah, I just would love to hear about how you got started and how you had the like I guess the knowledge or the will to learn how to make it happen.
Yeah, I'd say more will than knowledge. It's I took the PE exam. It would have been 2014, and at the time, the only available resources well, there's only a few, and they either weren't very good or they were very expensive, or in some cases both. And I found that the big complaint of everybody that took the exam, and I talked to people who had taken it 10 years prior, they said, well, yeah, there's not a lot of resources, and it's terrible. Somebody should do something about it. And I kind of got to the point, after I took it, that I was like, well, I could do something about it. It's a very, very niche space. I mean, it's only at most 250, 260 people worldwide take that exam each year. So it's a very small group, and that's why a lot of these large publishing houses haven't gone after it. But for the people taking that PE exam, it's really important. It's an extremely important exam career-wise, for those who studied engineering. So um, that first year, I put together a formula sheet that I had used for the exam, and sold that. It was maybe like a dozen copies that first year or something like that. And the feedback I got was tremendous. They said this is really good, but we want practice problems. There's only so many that are out there right now. So I started writing practice problems, bound it together in a book, and then 2016, that was the first time I had published a book, and that was on it was the prep guide for the fire protection PE exam, and same kind of thing. Sold more, got great feedback, got a whole bunch of input saying we need more content on special hazards and foams, and want more practice problems in those areas, and tidy up some things, and give it another shot. So I published annual editions of that prep guide each year, and each year tweaking it, adding more, making it a little bit better, and that's grown to be a really big deal. I think last year, let's see, for the 2020 exam, we had something like 3/4 of everybody taking the exam had that book, or at least the latest edition of the book. So
Wow.
um, it's really it's really turned into something big. Now, I mean, it's only a small audience when you compare it to mechanical or electrical or something like that, but um, that's kind of the origin of where I got started. And once that PE side started doing well, that's when I kind of figured, well, that there's good content out there that people are writing, but most of it, when you see articles in magazines, or topics and webinars and stuff, there's good content out there, but a lot of it tends to be very high level. You can read an article, and engineers, we tend to be risk averse. And when you're writing to the public, we tend to err on the side of I'm not going to say anything controversial so nobody can prove me wrong. And articles, I think, as a result, tend to be very high level, and without a lot of takeaways. And I didn't have a very deep knowledge base. I'm not an expert in any particular application, and I haven't been in the industry for 35 years. But I do know some of the day-to-day challenges that I come across and the things that I'm seeing on projects, and I can speak to those, and I can speak to those very specific issues, the in the weeds type topics. And so that's what I started doing. And when that must have been probably 2017, 2018, probably around the time that you were following it. But um, early on, nobody read those. It was maybe a dozen people that were subscribed to the emails, and about half of them had my last name. So it was, it wasn't anything special by any stretch, but um, it just same kind of thing. Just wrote a little bit more, got some feedback, said, hey, your visuals are good, do more of those. Hey, these cheat sheets are interesting, do more of those, and kept coming back with just new ideas, and it's grown into something really big. I mean, now it's the website does really well. We've got a forum, more people can post questions anonymously, and there's people way smarter than I am that are on there each day, contributing and sharing ideas on good practices for fire protection. And that to me, that's really neat to see, because that's what the original vision was, is to bring together people much smarter than myself who are passionate about the industry, and be able to contribute to the industry, and give back in a way that is really rewarding for everybody.
That's awesome, man. I got to give a shout out to Nathan Sandman, is the fire protection engineer that I think first introduced me to your content, and he had taken the FPE. I don't know if it was the year before, and passed using your materials, and then so he kind of was influential in helping me pass and introducing to me to your stuff. So just want to give a shout out to Sandman. I don't know if he'll listen to this, but
That's awesome. I find it really funny in the PE space. Like I said, there's only so many people, so in that space. And when I go to conferences and hear from people, It's I'm so and so, and I'll only catch the first name, and then the question's always, what's your last name? And then oh yeah, like I've seen your post on the forum, or I know it's sad, but I know people by the 2 word description that's their full name, and not put a face to it until I see people at a conference and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's funny when you talked about people that have passed the exam. If they're if they're commenting online, something like that, yeah, chances are I know the digital version of them before I meet them in person.
That's crazy. That's funny that you have that interaction, or like those things that pop across your, when you meet somebody at a conference or something, that'll ping that sensory memory of, you know, maybe their name coming. It'd be
That's
funny. Have you ever met anybody who has been on the leaderboards and been like, "Oh, I'm ridiculous name 23 or whatever."
yeah, well, yeah, and so yeah, in the PE online, I had a weekly exam series, and that's morphed into online question. But in there, we have a lot of fun with it. I don't know if you were involved in that when you took the exam. I might have not have even offered it back then, but uh, we do like weekly competitions. So I post the top scores for each week on these mini PE exams, and we have fun with it. People come up with all kinds of goofy nicknames and stuff that go up there. But then I tend to know people by their nickname and not their real name, because that's where all the comments are, and that's when I'm running the stats and everything. And so, it's like I'll meet so and so whose username was NFPA has all my money. It's like, well, I know that guy as NFPA has all my money. But I got to kind of scale it back a little bit and recognize it's
That's
a real
funny.
person.
That's great. No, yeah, I definitely used the series when I was going through it, and I wasn't formally on the boards, but I definitely did the problems every day. I was a problem monster when I was trying to consume every source of I had, like, every resource you could buy out there for it. But no, that's awesome. Yeah, I just wanted to, for those who don't know, I mean, it seems obvious for me, but for those who don't know, would you speak about a little bit more about, like, some of the tools that you've been producing on Meyer Fire, and maybe who's somebody who's less familiar, what's your kind of top three for tools that you would suggest for people to go out for, whatever, any role in fire and life safety?
Yeah. So there's a few things that I've got on the website that tend to do really well. One is the cheat sheets. So code can get pretty complex pretty quickly as far as the avenues and the directions that it points you between different sections. So I've got a series of cheat sheets and flowcharts. I think if you were looking for any one tool, the cheat sheets that do the best are I've got a comparison between NFPA 13, 13R, and 13D, and that gets searched a lot and gets a lot of good feedback. And it's more or less a high level comparison between all the different repercussions that come out of the different standards. The other one that tends to do really well is canopies. I've got a cheat sheet on when sprinklers are required for canopies, and that tends to do pretty well too. The other one is the actual software tools themselves. So I've got a toolkit on there, and that's a combination of all these kind of quick hitting software tools. The one that does really well that I just finished up recently is the system estimator. And what that does is it lays out a tree configuration sprinkler system. And with just a few clicks or a few inputs, you can change it to a dry system, or change your density, or change your sprinkler K factor, your sprinkler spacing. And in live in real time, it's running hydraulic calculations and giving you an estimate on the pressure and flow that you need for that system. And when you lay out a system, to do an estimate or something like that, uh, you've got to determine your sprinkler spacing, your K factor, your branch line locations. And every time you make a tweak, you got to rerun the hydraulic calcs. Well, when you change sprinkler spacing, that could affect your remote area. And if your remote area changes and it kicks over to another branch line, well, that has big repercussions on your calcs. And so the tool, the big one here just recently is this Estimator tool where all those other parameters are also live updating with you as you make those changes. So if you jump to a dry system, now your remote areas, increasing by 30%. Or if you change your K factor, or you change your sprinkler spacing, the other parameters around that are also updating in real time. So it's a pretty powerful tool, and it's good for estimating systems where you can very quickly see the implications of each little design decision. But I'd say those, of everything we got going on the website, that those seem to be the big ones that do pretty well.
Yeah, I think I wear my coworkers out because every time we have a different design problem, I'll be like, "There's a Meyer Fire for that," and then grab a cut sheet or something. Yeah, I think one of my favorite tools is the water supply analysis tool and how that graph works and functions. That was one of the first times I was looking at a Joe Meyer tool and I was like, man, this is nice. This is nicer than the Excel sheet that my company has, and was taking a look at it for the startup of different projects. So yeah, not only are they good tools, but you can use them as kind of teaching resources. I'll use the duct detector handout for, when I'll have discussions for design professionals or talking to mechanical engineers. So there's all kind of great uses for these different cut sheets.
That's awesome. Yeah. When and I came to a realization a couple of years ago that it's like, if I can create a tool that that only serves me, that I create for myself, then there's only so much value to it. I'm not going to go and chart every change in NFPA 13 between each of the editions and where the sections move around for my own use. It just I wouldn't do it because I'd put in 150 hours for a tool that I might only get a half hour back. But what's really neat is when you expand that scale and you're serving a much greater audience, then those 150 hours of research to do an edition translator where you can punch in any code section from any edition of NFPA 13 and get the kickback on where it is now in a different edition. Well, it's like, well, now it's a huge value to the industry. And all I got to do is run that research down once, put up the tool and post it. And there's plenty of possibilities there. And it's really exciting. So it's, having a software package where I can sell some of those features and then having free versions of them too, opens up a lot of doors. Those cheat sheets come to mind as being a good example. It takes a long time to do the research and run down all the flow paths, but once you get a good layout on how that is, it can make a big impact. And that's the goal. I mean, at the end of the day, is supporting people doing great work. That's really why the website's there.
I'm a big fan of these resources that help streamline your design process. So, yeah, I'm a huge fan of these and I have them printed out and posted up on my desk. But another really good resource is Chris Campbell's Allowable Building Area Calculator. I'm a big fan of that. So, I will use that for, starting up on different projects and kind of looking at some preliminary
Hmm.
case building allowable areas and limitations to speak with the architects who are getting into programming the space at an early part of the design phase. So yeah.
Yep. No, that's a great shout out. He does great work over there. I was a big fan. That's buildingcode.blog. I'm glad to hear they're getting some good use for sure.
So Joe, I'd really like to proceed forward with hearing a little bit about your design work and your consulting now. I have had a lot of time to read your blogs and look at your code sheets, and I just have a fascination about the different kind of works you get into because I could see kind of like how we talked about earlier that the work that you're doing kind of informs the blog content and the other fire protection and life safety material that you're putting out. So yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your consulting practice now.
Yeah, so the majority of my work is I split about 50-50, um, half of it being military related work. So that includes fire alarm, mass notification, suppression, and life safety. And then the other half of my work tends to be shop drawing design, particularly for sprinkler contractors. So dabble in kind of both sides of the consulting and bidding world, and they're two very different things, but Um, it's nice from a contract document standpoint. It's nice to see both sides of it and appreciate both sides of it, because they're different ends of the spectrum that are pointed at the same goal and same direction, but can be very different applications. But I mean, that's my workload. As far as the life safety and passive fire protection stuff, I've got into that because of the military work and involvement there. Not my native domain, if you will, but certainly come across it. When you've seen it before too. I don't know. We've talked about that. Is when you're a fire protection engineer, um, anything that's got the word fire in it means you're the go-to. You know, it's we're having fire flow issues at this middle school. Like, oh, ask a fire protection engineer. Like, it doesn't matter if you're only doing the sprinkler system or you're only doing a fire alarm layout or something like that. When you're the fire protection engineer and it says fire, they send you to it. So you kind of in this industry, you kind of have to play, a little bit wider role, even if you're not necessarily deep in any of those. You get a starting point, you research, you talk to the right people, and get the answers you need to. So that's kind of where I am with the life safety. I would certainly not by any stretch say that I'm an expert in that space, but I work on some of the lighter applications and can contact the right people when it gets pretty complex.
That's funny. I always joke about if it's a problem and it's got fire in the name, then it's my issue, even if it's not, directly tied to the fire protection systems or the life safety scope. So that's pretty
Mm-hmm.
funny. I was listening to some of the podcasts that you'd done before. I think this one was with Drew Slocum, and you were talking about switching over to Revit and kind of how it took you a while to break into it, but then there were some real efficiencies gained after you kind of put in the work to make that transition. I'd love to hear about, you know, designing fire sprinkler systems in Revit and, kind of what that looks like. I have a huge fascination in technology and automation and that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. So part of being on your own and doing your own billing and your own work, um, there's no better direct relation between the profitability on a job and what you get paid. If I work twice as slow, well, I get paid essentially half as much for the same amount of time. And when you're on your own, it's just so abundantly obvious how important productivity and efficiency is. And I don't mean to say, like I'm trying not to spend any time on jobs, but I want to spend time in the right places on a job. If there's tricky situations or there's complex areas, I want to detail those out and flesh those out and spend my time working on the challenging parts of the job, not on the mundane drafting tasks. And so, productivity and efficiency is something that, from my own consulting standpoint, I've put a lot of thought into, and I've worked really hard to develop a workflow that's efficient. I'm not doing things twice, and when I make changes, I'm not working backwards in my workflow. I'm always progressing forward, and projects are always moving towards a completion. It's so easy in design to say, oh, I forgot about this, I need to go back, and then you make changes, and then all of your pipe tags need to be updated, or your calcs need to be updated, or your seismic bracing needs to shift. And so part of that process for me in the workflow was thinking big picture. How do you finish a job when you first get handed it to when you turn it over? And Revit for me plays a huge role into that. So 2016, I said no more CAD. I'm all in on Revit. And it might have been a little premature because I was not 100% confident in fleshing out every detail in Revit, especially when you're doing shop drawings. If you need a specific fire department connection or inspector's test, or some component that the manufacturer isn't providing, well, that's for me to create. I got to create that family, and I've got to model that with real takeouts and real dimensions, and not just on the consulting side you can kind of use something close and call it something else. So on the shop drawing side, the level of detail and everything, I've got to create that. But once I went in on Revit, both feet in, even with CAD backgrounds, or heck, now even sometimes I only get PDFs. You know, I can make a Revit model out of that, or use the CAD backgrounds in 2 dimensions, throw in some section cuts, and now I'm working out of a 3D model, even though the backgrounds are in 2D. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. It was really painful. It probably took a couple years, honestly, of constantly figuring out the pain points. And, for a while, drawing arm overs, just connecting sprinklers to branch pipe took hours on each job until I figured out a workflow. Or like you talked about, what you're kind of hinting at, is doing some of the back end programming, or finding programs like HydroCAD for Revit or AutoSprink RVT that can pound those out. And once I started to put those pieces together, about 2 years in, I was about as fast as I was prior in CAD. Um, but now, since that point, it's a night and day difference. I mean, there's no possible way I would go back now, because the efficiencies and the analytics that are in the model is unbelievable. I got a client that calls and says, "Hey, I know you just got done with the permit set. I want to bulk order pipe for this job and have it sit in the warehouse because pipe's going up. Can you tell me how much pipe at each diameter, at each schedule is in this job?" Well, if you're in CAD, I mean, unless you've got something programmed on the back end or have some real savvy tool to pull that off, uh, that might be an exercise in estimating and getting those pipe counts. Well, when you're in Revit, the intelligence is already there. So I pull up a schedule, and 3 seconds later, I say, yeah, here's the diameters of the pipe across the board. Here's the schedules for each. Here's your lengths. Here's your finished lengths for all of them. And I know immediately if I make a change, that's all live smarts in the model. So I make change to schedule 40, in the model. Well, now the calcs are also updating with schedule 40, and the fab list is also updated schedule 40. So it's a bear, to get in and get used to. But once I was all in, that's when you really start to break through with some of the efficiency gains. And I think, um, within the last few years, within the last 5 years, maybe a little bit longer than that, there's just been an incredible amount of opportunity in improving productivity and improving efficiency in programs like Revit, because other industries have created add-ins, or we're now getting the add-ins, and there's I feel I've talked to a few people about it. It's like, if we're designing systems the same way we are now, that we were 7 or 8 years ago, totally missing the boat, because there's so much opportunity out there with different software packages to speed up that workflow. And now drafting isn't the burden. It's, now I can spend time talking to clients, or working through those challenging details on a project, and not necessarily, drawing arm overs and pipe tags.
Yeah, I think that the industry is kind of catching up to, having this ability to be more geared for designing in Revit. So it's interesting for me to hear about that kind of trend for
Mm-hmm.
you gaining some efficiencies and leaning towards Revit, even though there was some initial startup energy and kind of investment on the front end. But yeah, I really like hearing about that.
Yeah, it is. I think on the consulting side, we went through that change between, what, 2005 and maybe 2012, company by company, and started to get to the point where, like, okay, half our projects are in Revit, or 3/4 of our projects are in Revit. Anything that's new construction, or anything that's big, tends to go Revit. And so the consulting world has already migrated over and feels at least comfortable in that space. Contracting world doesn't really have that pressure, unless it's mandated in the specs, or it's a military job that requires it, or government job that requires it. They don't have that impetus that we do on the consulting side. And also, the players tend to be different. If you're only in the contracting side, and you've been stock listing and designing in CAD forever, well, there's really no reason to change, considering that you're going to be less efficient for a period of time, just to get, it might be a couple years before you get to the point where you're at the same level of efficiency. So I feel like, especially for smaller contractors, it's a really difficult thing to overcome. What I am seeing frequently is for larger contractors or larger design groups within a contracting environment that they'll dabble in Revit and they'll get a person or two that becomes an expert in that and works on those complex or new construction jobs and starts to collaborate and clash in real time. And they're the ones that are kind of the seeds that are growing that possibility. Um, when I was when I was in a seminar, it was like 2016, 2017 in Revit. It was a room full of contractors. Must have been 30 different companies there, and they asked like, "Who's in Revit right now?" And it was 100% in Revit right now. We were the only ones that raised our hand, and who wants to be in Revit? And it was like three-quarters of the room raised their hand. I mean, it's just I think the interest is there and the momentum is there. It's just going to take some time for that development, the templates, and everybody to be comfortable with Revit. And honestly, for the contractors to see a return on their investment in that, you got to struggle through for a little while so you get used to it. You're thinking in terms of Revit and not thinking in terms of CAD. It's like learning a new language. It's a different perspective, and if you're trying to take one and translate it directly to the other, it doesn't work very well. It's a totally different way of thinking. So we'll get there, and I think you're right. I think we're on kind of a cusp of transitioning over to those Revit kind of environments. But 15 years from now, the CAD will still be around. There'll still be a place for it. But it tend to see it more and more with people that go from consulting to contracting, or people that just come out of school and only know Revit. That's where we're seeing that change.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on the fire protection engineering exam and what you think about what's happened with online and the switch to online. I know there's been a lot of change that's happened, and I think that there's not too many people as well qualified to speak about this topic as you. So, yeah, I'd love to get your take on what we're seeing as changes and some of the trends so far with the people who have taken the exam.
Yeah. Well, as of October 2020, and then there's a follow up exam January, it was 2021 last month. It's all now computer based. And so the exam format has gone from 80 questions to 85, and it's all online. It's run through computer testing centers. I think the Pearson VUE testing environment. That's no longer open book. So, we used to have, I mean, at least in my case, I had like this giant, biggest piece of luggage I could find that was full of handbooks, lugging it into the exam environment. So that's gone. It's only the reference NCES guide and then code snippets from standards is the only thing that's in the exam. And then the format's changed too. The question styles are different. It's still multiple choice for some of the questions, but there's fill in the blank. There's visual questions, and then there's ordering and a handful of different question formats that they've introduced. So by and large, it's a very different exam than it was just a few years ago. The first year, the results we're seeing are tremendous. Pass rates went from about 55 to 60% pass rates. That's been consistent through most of the last decade. To this last exam, for some reason, we had like an 87% overall pass rate. So it jumped way up. And I don't know. I don't know what the cause of that is. I know there was less people that took the exam this year because it was the first year and they kind of felt like guinea pigs. But um, yeah, big changes on that front. And so, I live in the PE prep space. So we're always getting user feedback on how to improve and what we need to change, how we need to adapt. And I think everybody across the board, the different organizations that are involved in PE prep, we all kind of took every word that came out of NCES and the exam development committee and tried our best to kind of point everybody in the right direction. But now that we've got that first year of computer exams out of the way, there's a lot of feedback, and I think everybody's kind of adjusting to it. So, if you're somebody that's out there that's interested in taking the PE exam, take it. There's no reason not to. There's a lot of studying and a lot of time that goes into preparing for the exam. But it's a big deal, and it's a really big marker on your career when you pass. So I would not discourage anybody from taking it just because of the exam changes. In the long run, I think it'll be a very good thing because it's starting to focus on knowledge more than lookup ability or our understanding of where content is located across. It was like 9,600 pages of content. So I think that's a good thing. I just also think that there's an adjustment period on what we've known to be true for the PE exam for the last decade plus, and what the exam is today, and those are just two different things.
Yeah, I can't help but be a little bit curmudgeon-y about me having to carry around a huge tote of books with, strapped to a dolly in a crate. Um, but yeah, it's kind of interesting that the changing questions, from the paper exam, it's remarkable, and I think they're still kind of adapting to the way that it's all functioning. So it'll be interesting how the next couple sessions pan out.
Agreed. And there is no that's right. There is no glory for the people that write those questions or the exam committee. I think it's all volunteer work, and they try really hard to do a good job. But it's a really tough task because our audience size is only so big. There's only so many volunteers, and it's a wide variety of exam content. So kudos to them for the exam committee and everything, and who those people are. They could tell you they do it, but that's all they could tell you. I mean, the exam preparation space and then the actual exam review committee are two different groups, and they're not allowed to talk to each other. So, they try hard, but it also, it can be a tough exam. It's got a wide variety of content, and rightfully so. I mean, we do want our engineers to be, at least what we consider the minimally competent engineer to be, pretty thorough in their knowledge and understanding of the exam. But yeah, I'm big changes, but I do think it's going in the right direction. They're starting to get to a point where it's testing better aptitude. When I took the exam, I didn't take it in my home state, so I like I said, I got my wife's largest suitcase, and I packed it full of handbooks and anything that I thought could possibly be helpful. And I got to the airport, and it was like 85 pounds, and they told me I had to distribute the weight, otherwise I couldn't bring it onto the plane. So did some mad scrambling, and my handbooks were in the middle of a bunch of sweaters by the time that they got where they needed to go. So it's a very different environment today.
Yeah, it's crazy because when I took my PE exam, I had to put a trash bag over that little rig that I had going with the crates bungee corded to the
Oh no.
dolly on the and with the books all inside of them, about a half a dozen to probably closer to a dozen books, and so it was just pouring rain when I got there, and I had to put money into the parking meter, and so it was just a crazy thing
Yeah.
to deal with while I was also so stressed.
And for whatever reason, the time in our lives when we were taking the PE exam, I mean, I was never on a tighter budget than those years when I was right around taking the PE exam, and saving money on budget flights and budget hotels. And you mentioned the bungee cord and I mean, I couldn't tell you the ways that the people I had asked about figuring the best way to cart all this material in, just to save a buck and try and get it through. So yeah, it's a unique experience for sure.
Joe, what would you recommend as a tip or a resource for someone who is looking to take the fire protection engineering exam in this new online era?
Yeah. I get into that a little bit in the book. I would say, a lot of the advice that you get is from people that have taken the exam. It's changed a lot since the online. A lot of the old advice would be to be familiar with materials above all else so that you can find answers. So that's really not what the exam is testing anymore. Um, But I do have, there's a few things that when people ask that question, I try and steer them to. And I think the biggest one is finding prep materials. It's not it's not usually an either or. Should I buy this or this, or should I study this and not this? It's usually a and. It's get as much material as you can. If your company's paying for prep material, good, use it. Get your hands on anything that you can, because the more practice, the better. I find that the people that kind of exhaust their options with practice problems and and prep content, that they've got more to study, they've got more practice, and they get a more well-rounded experience. So I would, whether it's competitors or not, I'd encourage anybody to get their hands on as much as they can, so that they're getting enough practice. The other thing I think people struggle with is time. I always get asked how much do I actually need to study, and that varies person to person. But it's a big time investment, and I always say try to be fair to yourself when you're planning out that time and setting aside that time uh, to study, because it's not a good exam to cram 3 weeks before and try and get 100 hours or 200 hours of studying, and right at the end it really just it doesn't sink in, and people don't tend to do well. So you kind of have to plan to study, plan to plan. Setting aside that time, I think is really helpful. And then there's free tools too. We set up a Facebook group for the fire protection PE exam a few years back. That's done really well. There's a lot of really great questions in there that people have had answered by other people who have taken the exam. And fire protection, we're a small, passionate group, and so there's a lot of people in there that help each other out in real ways. So and that's free. And there's other free opportunities too. Some people post free questions. I know we do a series of free daily questions during exam season, and I just I said get your hands on as much as you can. Get the free material, and pound the books. That's usually the advice.
Yeah, I think that's all great advice, Joe. My, just to add on to that sentiment, I think that doing problems, as many as you can, is the number one way that you can prepare yourself for the fire protection engineering exam.
Mhm.
Furthermore, on that note, getting your resources, being familiar with the types of problem, getting some prep material, I think is pretty crucial. Even with the higher passing rates, I think that they're gonna probably course correct a little bit on how the pass rates are. So get as many problems in as you can and really hit it hard. I think that was what really made me feel the most comfortable on the day of the exam. So
Yeah.
yeah, I really
Yep.
like that.
Yep. That's what we're people that are walking out of the exam. That's generally what they're saying is the ones that feel the most comfortable tend to be the people that have done the most practice, and feel comfortable themselves in those kind of a wide variety of testing environments.
Yeah, I think I exhausted, like all the questions in your guide, and was also doing the daily questions and just really crunching the numbers on anything I could find. And so there's such a wide variety of difficulties between, the questions. Some would be really long and super hard, and others would be brief and sort of easier. And so I think that the medium, at least for when I took the exam, was somewhere in the middle. So it's really kind of interesting to do a bunch of problems and wide variety of difficulties because you don't really know what you're gonna get.
Yeah. Yep. And there's no end to the appetite for questions. I mean, we've since I got started, we've written over it's probably 600 prep questions now, and there's probably we still have about 400 that are relevant to the current exam. The old ones cycle out, and or there's a handful that aren't relevant anymore. But that's what we get asked every year: is or is there going to be more? Can we add to it? Is a new edition coming out with new questions, additional questions, and we're trying all the time to keep filling that need and serving that market for sure.
Yeah, I love to speak with, professionals and kind of get their tips and tricks or their views on what's going on in the industry. So, we're coming towards the tail end of the interview, and I just wanted to talk about, what you see as trends in the industry. I know we've talked about, technology a little bit. I've had some recent experience with like BIM 360 and kind of taking a look at some different tools at the company I'm working now for. So, yeah, I really have enjoyed any way that you can find as a professional to try to get ahead and stay competitive and really try to go the distance and, be on the cutting edge. So, would love to get your take on what you see as a trend in the industry and, yeah, any tips and kind of professional advice.
Yeah, I think we hit on one of them, which is productivity. I mean, if you're designing the same way you were five or more years ago, that there's some real opportunities out there. It's whether it's on the hydraulic calc front or drafting front, Revit, modeling, but then also lightweight tools. My whole emphasis with the website is kind of filling in your lightweight toolkit. Your tool belt basically is what are the things you're thinking about regularly as a fire protection engineer daily. What are those calculations or what are those decisions that we're making uh, that we can do better or we can do more efficiently. And so that's more or less kind of the spectrum where I live. I'm hitting quick tools that give you instant feedback and help you be more productive. But across the board, there's just so much opportunity. Free add-ins for Revit, paid add-ins for Revit. There's been a tremendous amount of R&D on Revit for the fire protection world. I mean, there's you mentioned, BIM 360 is not fire protection specific, but that's been a gain in real time modeling. AutoSprink RVT, HydroCAD for Revit. Vikings come out with some tools. Victolic's got tools. There's across the board. I mean, I see huge opportunities in better productivity than we had, like I said, just 5 years ago. So I don't know that I would say that's a trend overall. Like I'm getting feedback from other people about that, but I'm seeing that as a major opportunity in the industry. Um, there's always the challenges that are changing. So I mean, as far as trends go, the buzzwords, the hot topics are just storage seems to always be changing. We've got I come into warehouses regularly where there's these old pipe schedule systems, or they were designed for a carton class 3 commodity, and now they're storing plastics. There's so much plastics in our world now, and so when we get into storage, that's just a very different landscape on what we're designing now versus what we were designing in the 1960s, 1970s. Electric cars, battery storage, even marijuana grow facilities, and those are challenges that I think we're seeing today that weren't necessarily the case, a generation ago. So plastics maybe a generation ago, but for the others, we've got new technology and new challenges there. So those are those are the trends. I can't speak to any of those. I'm not an expert in any of those spaces, but um, I do see a lot of questions, a lot of content kind of get shuffled around, and how we're addressing those new challenges before the committees, are able to kind of completely flesh that out. And then one interesting one, just recently, prepping for the show and thinking about it is, I don't know, I always hear that when the economy is good, that people are more willing to start their own companies and go out on their own. And, when the tide rolls back out, that you kind of see who is skinny dipping more or less. But when the economy has been good and sustained with a lot of work, I have seen, myself included, a good handful of fire protection engineers and designers that go out and start their own practice. And some of them are like me that are intending to stay small and aren't necessarily looking to grow a company. But then there's plenty of others that are more of a traditional company growth model mindset. And it's really interesting being, like I said, fire protection is a small community, knowing a handful of people that have gone out on their own and have done really well, started just within the last 2 or 3 years. So I don't know that it would necessarily qualify as a trend, based on your question, but I do know that, with the virus, people working from home, the community, the clientele being accepting of working from home and remote work, that you know I see the flex worker or the independent, I wouldn't say freelance, but the independent practitioner being more and more common and more accepted today. And the reality is, if you've got clients that are getting better service and more responsive interactions with the people that they're hiring, that can be a really a good thing for everybody. So it's amazing. It seems like every month, I hear about somebody else going out on their own, and we get connected, and kind of got this underground network, if you will, to support each other, and for those groups, and help, spread around work and that kind of thing. It's been an interesting trend for sure.
Yeah, I think that collaboration is so awesome, and I love hearing about that because I take a look at the other podcasts in the space and fire life safety, and I'm just super excited
Mm-hmm.
about the chance to collaborate and that the space is growing, and that it's starting to build a real industry here in this content production space. So I really enjoy what you said about entrepreneurs banding together and small practitioners. I love that term. And so, yeah, it's cool to hear about how people are, banding together. Fire protection has always been a pretty tight
Right.
niche
Right.
um, group. So yeah, I definitely resonate with that sentiment that people are willing to lend a helping hand and band together. And, when you're out on your own, kind of.
Yeah. Before I made the jump, myself, I guess I wouldn't have guessed that, that those people are connected, and they exist and talk to each other, and support each other. And the reality is just the opposite. I mean, it's really pretty neat to see. We all want each other to do well, and it's it's different when you don't look at somebody as a competitor, but you look at them as an ally and another advocate for fire protection, and doing good work in the engineering industry. So we do our best to help each other out, and if I know a contact's licensed in certain states, and when I get leads, and can help direct it that way. And so for for the small practitioners, it's that's been a really good thing. But to a little bit more your point, I mean, just 5 years ago, do we have any podcasts in fire protection? I mean, maybe NFPA was putting out things here and there, but we've got plenty of good startups in that space. And I think, to your point, like 10 years ago, we didn't even have podcasts. So, or maybe we did. I mean, maybe it was 15 or 20. Um, but between the podcast popping up, and blogs, I mean, I don't think engineering blogs was really a thing a decade ago. And we see stuff. NFPA puts out good stuff. NFSA. Um, you mentioned Chris Campbell over there, building code, that blog. He's got things going, and so there's plenty of opportunity there, and for people that are willing to kind of step out and discuss challenges in the open. There's plenty of opportunity for that, and I don't think that's something that's going to go away. It's going to continue to be more of a positive for the industry.
Yeah, I'm just really excited about the podcast space and the content development space because you know if you think about it, everybody is kind of doing their own thing and not really in competitive spaces. It's all kind of echoing and amplifying each other to some extent. And if you're putting out good content, I've found that there is a really a huge need for that, and that if your stuff really is good, then you shouldn't worry about having to be competitive because There's always people who are looking for good content, and I listen to podcasts all the time. And if something is really good and I like it, I'll listen to, 5 or 10 different podcasts that I'm really interested in. So I think it's great.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. There's room for everybody, and yeah, there's a unique angle from each one. That's a good thing.
Well, Joe, I can't tell you how much it means to me to get to talk to you and do this pod. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been awesome.
You got it. Anytime, Gus. Happy to be here.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to share the episode with a friend if you enjoyed it. Don't forget that fire protection and life safety is serious business. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are by no means a professional consultation or a codes and standards interpretation. Be sure to contact a licensed professional if you are getting involved with fire protection and or life safety. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.